Story 1, Amnesia, The Dark Descent. The water level was overall one of the most intense experiences I've had in gaming, and the final few moments when leaving it had my heart racing in a let me put this down for now kind of way. Story 2, for me it was Skyrim. When you go into the first Draugr tomb, I was so scared my brother had to sit beside me. Halfway through the cave, he left to go play Skyrim on his personal computer, and I just turned off the game and waited until he had time to sit beside me again. Rest in peace, brother. Story 3, Ocarina of Time. When I first went inside the Deku Tree, then again in the Forest Temple, and again at the bottom of the well. For the last time, when I saw the gap before the first room in the Shadow Temple. As a 9-year-old kid, the game was just horror and suspense in places I didn't expect. I screamed when I saw the zombie freeze Link in the cemetery, but that was only for about 2 seconds before I understood what was going on. Story 4, I had the house to myself. It was the middle of the night, and I foolishly thought, oh, I'll treat myself to the surround sound. I heard blades scraping along walls and growling in the distance. Then, as I walked around the corner, this enormous creature just jumps out of the ground. I just said, forget that, and decided to watch episodes of Scrubs instead. Story 5, Vampire, The Masquerade Bloodlines. There's a bit where you're exploring a haunted building. It had some jump scares, poltergeist shenanigans, ghostly figures, and such, and it was all pretty shticky, so it wasn't too bad even for my 13-year-old brain. But then I went into an elevator or some other enclosed space. I don't remember exactly. And 1 second later, there was this awful racket, and I was just dead with no idea why. For some reason, it really messed with me. It was days before I launched the game again, and nothing ever happened in that elevator that time around or on any future playthrough. Story 6, Resident Evil 4. I started the game, it was cool, a bit scary but okay. A friend of mine told me about the bladed blind zombie that you have to divert by ringing bells. His story was so scary I just left the game, too scared to meet that zombie. I recently played the reworked version and just thought, oh, that's the guy? I shouldn't have stopped for this as a kid. Story 7, System Shock 2. I think I was only about 13 or so. I've since played all the other games people listed, and they didn't bother me. That game really scared me as a kid. Story 8, Ocarina of Time Queen Goma boss fight in the Deku Tree. Granted, I was 5 years old, but having a massive monster dropping from the ceiling was not good for kid me. Nightmares for days. Finally got over it and they hit me with dead hand. That was terrifying. Despite that, it became and still is my favorite game. Somehow. Story 9, for myself, the first game for me, I think I was about 11 or 12 at the time, was Resident Evil Outbreak in the area where the Leech Man shows up. I felt so incredibly alone, being stalked by a monster that would show up with no warning, and it was quite formidable, so I felt like I stood no chance. I turned it off and was scared it would come after me in real life. That game really scared me, and nowadays I love horror games. Story 10, Alien Isolation. Also, a fun story I remember not long after it came out, at a convention, there was a virtual reality mod setup running for it. You could hear the blood-curdling screams across the hall. Something about crawling through a pipe and suddenly being dragged out, and having an alien tail mashed through your chest in first person, is enough to experience once or twice for me, and never again. Story 11. Half-Life 2's Raven Home was pretty scary. Back in the very early days of Steam, there used to be a Half-Life 2 demo that included about 1/3 of the Raven Home level only, and I didn't have the courage to even enter the level. Story 12. Minecraft in virtual reality. I was not prepared. I loaded in, found a creeper, and it was taller than I was. It was like looking up at the thing before I ran for my life, fell off a cliff, which was even more terrifying due to the fall, into a hole with zombies. Story 13. Diablo 1. Back in 1997. I was 7 years old, already disturbed by the wounded person at the front of the cathedral, but I was terrified once I heard the, fresh meat. And of course, I died and the screen turned red to the game over screen. That scared me so much, I had to turn the computer off. Story 14. The original Aliens vs. Predator. Playing in the dark, leaning back on a dining room chair, hearing that damned motion sensor beeping while stalking around as a colonial marine. trying to sneak up on a predator out of nowhere. A xenomorph dropped from the ceiling and ended my character so quickly that I fell backwards off my chair. Decided it was a good time to quit and go to bed. Story 15, Last Half of Darkness, released in 1989, though I remember playing it around 1994, likely a bargain bin purchase, if I recall correctly. It has been a while. 99% of the game is about as scary as a bath towel. However, there is one specific jump scare that comes absolutely out of nowhere and is very startling if you are not aware it will happen. Anyway, I was playing it, hit that part, and decided I no longer needed to play Last Half of Darkness. I haven't touched it in, 30 years? I have no desire to now. Story 16. I don't really play scary video games, so mine is a very recent game. But Alan Wake 2 creeped me out so much that I often could only play for short bits of time, then would take multiple week breaks before coming back. Story 17. Never had a game make me tap out, but playing the first Dead Space for the first time ever, and at night with the lights off, gave me a full-on anxiety attack. Story 18. I don't game, but I love watching my partner play. He was playing The Evil Within, and we were both so stressed and shaky. I ended up finding a walkthrough and would give him a heads up right before an attack, and we made a pretty good team. Story 19. Mine is pretty funny, thinking about it now. So, there was a visual novel, Underworld Office, which had a great art style. I am not a fan of horrors or even slightly scary games. Well, it can't be that bad, right? After the first jump scare, I nearly fell off the chair and had to force myself to breathe normally. I deleted the game the second I could reach my phone without feeling panic. Story 20. As a kid, I was 7 years old when Resident Evil 1 was released. I still remember the first zombie that wakes up in the beginning. Holy cow, was I afraid! But then I got used to it and I was old enough to understand and play games rather well when Resident Evil 3, Nemesis hit the stores. It became one of my favorite games as a kid. Story 21. This one is weird, but out in the wilds, I had hit something and bounced into Giant's Deep for the first time, and something about that was just nope territory for me. Story 22. Old schooler here, back then playing Turok at 3:40 a.m. It was dark, and hearing the loud thumping footsteps of a T-Rex charging at me. I didn't turn it off but was shaken. I played for another 3 hours, then got ready for work. Story 23. I had gotten a gaming laptop for the first time and was playing it in my friend's basement at a sleepover. It was around 4 a.m. I'm the only one up, the lights are off, and it's stormy and rainy outside. I remember the hospital level with Alma stalking me around every corner. I was extremely low on health, already freaking out, my hands shaking, and I was breathing heavily. As I was walking down a hallway in the hospital, I came up to a corner with the sound of a baby crying. I literally had uncontrollable shakes. I rounded the corner, looked at the maternity ward window, the lights went out, and a monster nurse thing slammed against the window, blood splashing everywhere. Holy cow, I freaked out. I jumped out of my seat, my heart pounding out of my chest. The laptop goes flying, cables being pulled everywhere, and the mouse gets thrown at the TV. I noped so fast out of there, hit the power button, ran upstairs and went to bed next to a night light. That night, I learned the true meaning behind the game fear. Forget everything and run. One of the best games I ever played. Story 24. When I was probably around 7 or 8 years old, I was playing Mighty Final Fight on Nintendo Entertainment System. I would always stop at the third boss and turn the game off because one of his attacks involved inappropriately touching the player character. Story 25. That burrowing lobster bit in Warframe couldn't technically turn the game off but went away from keyboard and would just move the stick around every once in a while to keep it from timing out. Story 26. Condemned. Criminal Origins. I screamed like a little girl while you photographed a corpse in a locker. When you go for the shot, the corpse wakes up and pulls you in. Love that game. Story 27. Visage. I was warned. The very first few seconds of the intro scene, I was navigating the haunted house and I swear my blood pressure was going up as the panic and danger signs started to glow. A teddy bear moved position when I looked back and I almost punched my laptop screen. It is way too good at being frightening. It's all so subtle that it gets into your head. and then it's not so subtle. I screamed when I was in the kitchen. If you've played it, you'll know. I never made it as far as the basement or lower floor. Nope. Story 28. The first Resident Evil. However, the scariest game I have ever played is Alien Isolation. In VR, that game is terrifying. I just barely beat Resident Evil 7, also in VR, and it was a definite nope experience. Story 29. The first game I remember scaring me just by watching was when I went to spend the weekend at my cousin's. I still vividly remember watching him play Resident Evil on the PlayStation 1, and that was the first time I learned about zombies. It scared me so much, and I had nightmares for a long time after that. The first game that made me immediately quit and just use Alt plus F4 was Alien Isolation. That game just messes me up even today. I love the game itself, but I can never finish it because it freaks me out to the core. Story 30. The Forest. It is not that scary now that I know everything about the game, but the first time I got dragged to the cave and got surprised by a mutant while trying to find a way out, I literally had to start a new save because I was so scared. Even years after putting the game down, I still have nightmares of being chased through a forest by hordes of cannibals and mutants. Story 31. I think I actually got scared by Thief 2 when I was a kid. I have no idea what age exactly, but definitely younger than 11. There wasn't anything scary about it, really. Just me getting way too worked up about creeping through the darkness and being scared of getting caught. Story 32. The Evil Within made it through the intro. Had a great story I wanted to finish. I went to YouTube to see if anyone was game streaming it and watched my first gaming stream, thanks to Markiplier. Story 33. Friday the 13th for the Nintendo Entertainment System was a game I played when I was a kid. God damn it, you would be just walking down a path and all of a sudden the Jason meter would start going off, but you would never know where he was going to come from and the music would just start. I lost my mind a few times. After that, Resident Evil 2. Story 34. Not a horror game, but that Xena Warrior Princess game on PlayStation 1. So what happened was that the game had a few scratches, and when it loaded up, the game crashed on a black screen. It had a man screaming like he was falling into a death pit, and that thud, like the scream was cartoony and yet scary at the same time. I quickly pressed the off button. I was 7 at the time and my heart was racing. I didn't know what to do, but to make sure I wasn't just hearing it, I decided to try it one more time after cleaning the disc. The game went to a black screen and the scream happened again. I never turned it back on. I snapped the disc and threw it in the bin. To this day, it lives rent-free in my head. If anyone else had this game and it happened to them, I want to know if they had the same experience or it was just a one-off on my CD. Story 35. For me, it was 13. The stealth missions were so intense, and the associated deaths or failure were too much for me to tolerate as an early teen. I remember walking away from the game for weeks at a time before I could re-engage. Story 36. No scary by design, but one time I was playing GoldenEye in multiplayer mode by myself, just testing out different guns and such when the second player character began moving on its own accord. I was the only other person in the house, the second controller was sitting right next to me, and this was long before wireless controllers had even been contemplated. Freaked me out, so I turned off the game. Story 37. I played Doom 3 in the middle of the night on a laptop, with the only light coming from my screen. There's a spot where the screen goes blood red and you hear, "They took my baby." I shut it off and fired up Grand Theft Auto 3 for an hour just so I would be able to sleep that night. Story 38. I played Silent Hill, Resident Evil, Project Zero. No problem. I'm ashamed to admit that I can't play Minecraft. Yes, Minecraft. I just can't go down into the caves. It's dark. I run out of torches. I can hear spiders and creepers all around. No. And that terrifying black entity you can't look in the eyes, or else it comes and kills you. Story 39. Resident Evil 1 on the PlayStation 1. It was the door-opening cutscene/loading screen. It would fill you with fear of what was on the other side. And yes, that's how old I am. Story 40. Quake. Getting lightning shoved up my rear by the first shambler I came across caused me to invent both bunny hopping and backtracking at once. Story 41. Doom 3, the setting and atmosphere was so chilling that I couldn't play it at that time. Funny, though, I watched the movie Doom with The Rock and Carl Urban, and after that, I could play it without any issue. I felt like a badass. Story 42. A bit niche, but Lord of the Rings, The Third Age. I was 9, understood the films enough to know that none of these are main characters, but the main characters are there. The Fellowship couldn't beat the Watcher, and sneaking through Moria with the threat the Balrog could show up at any second. Didn't understand it was a scripted boss fight and thought it could, had me terrified. Turned it off and took a couple of years before I went back to it. Story 43. An old Mac game by Bungie before Halo, called Pathways into Darkness in the late 1990s. The first time I came across the apparition ghost, I nearly lost it. Story 44. Goosebumps Escape from Horrorland definitely shook me when I was a kiddo. That particular chase scene with the mummy, I begged my older sister to finish it for me. Story 45. I started playing Silent Hill at night when it first came out. I saw what looked like a naked demon child attack me in an alley and decided to put that issue on hold until the morning. Story 46. Haunted House on Atari. Hear me out, it was the first jump scare game I'd ever played. I was 6 years old when I got it, and it was far different from just about all the other Atari games at that time. Honorable mention after Haunted House. The first Resident Evil. That was a whole new level at the time when it came out.